morning, everyone. It is really exciting to see such a great group of you all with us this morning. My name is Lindsay Simpson, and I am the Program Administrator at the Center for Evidence to Practice. We are a partnership between the LSU Health Sciences Center School of Public Health located in New Orleans and the State Office of Behavioral Health. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, our mission is to expand access to evidence-based behavioral health services for children and adolescents served by Medicaid across the state of Louisiana. So since May, we have been sponsoring web-based training for behavioral health workforce, Medicaid providers in Louisiana on the implementation of evidence-based programs over telehealth platforms. This has been possible through an emergency COVID-19 federal SAMHSA grant that we are working with in partnership with OBH. So for today, we are very pleased to have Christine Bonura and Kirby Johnson with us to present on the implementation of MST by telehealth platforms. So I will drop my information in the chat box. If anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to communicate through the chat or through email, and CEUs will be distributed at the end or within the next day or so for those who participate in the entire session. And we will also send out a PDF of the presentation in the CEU follow-up email. All right, so I will hand over the mic to Christine and Kirby to introduce themselves and get us started.
Hi guys, I'm Christine Bonura and I work for Jefferson Parish Human Services Authority. I am in the role of MST Program Director. So my job is really starting new MST teams around not only Louisiana, but other states, and then also ensuring that those teams that are started are following the adherence to the model. So really looking at quality assurance. We have 5 experts that work for us under the network partner of Jefferson Parish Human Services Authority, and they work closely day to day with all of the providers. And so when we initially started to look at this training of doing telehealth, we had thought that it would mostly be MST providers on the call, but looking at the registration sheet, there's quite a few of y'all who are not currently part of a licensed provider organization. So if you're not, welcome. If you are, you've probably heard my voice a million times. But if you're not, and you're interested in doing MST, at the very end is my contact information, because you can't implement MST without the quality assurance and being part of a licensed provider organization. So definitely reach out to me if you have some interest at the end, or if you're actually looking for a local MST provider that you want to refer to, I can connect you with that information. So I think this training will serve multi-purposes for people. One, to get creative ideas of how to be more successful in implementing MST. And then the other is, if you're interested, to learn about it, and then also reach out to me if you have follow-up questions. And so when LSU had reached out to us about doing this presentation, I'm really at a macro level. I, implement the model at a very large scale, whereas I thought it would be really nice to have someone who is on the ground implementing MST. And so Kirby works for one of our providers, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Yeah, so my name's Kirby Johnson, and I work at the Center for Children and Families, and I believe this agency has probably had MST as a program, I don't even know for how long, but I know our CEO was one of the ones that helped bring it here. So MST is close to our heart here. And so I've been doing it for about 4 years, and I've been a supervisor for a little over 2 years now. And we have definitely had to make some adjustments figuring out how to implement MST through telehealth, because MST is very hands-on, very much in the home and intertwined in all the systems coordinated with our clients. So telehealth has been a challenge, but it's been doable, and we've been able to still have some great results with that. Because one of MST's mottos is whatever it takes. And so we have truly put that to work over the last few months. So yeah, I'm very honored and excited to be a part of this presentation and share a little bit about what we've been doing here.
So I thought we would start with just some questions for the group, and I think Lindsay has it set up where you can answer some of those questions in the chat box, but if not, you can ask them out loud. You know, we went back and forth, like, do we want everybody muted? Do we want people to talk? And Kirby and I both agree that we like to have questions. So if you don't want to put them in the chat box, certainly just unmute yourself and let us know. And so we were really curious about, you know, what forms of telehealth have you used during this time, specifically during COVID? Are y'all using video, audio, both? Are you using Zoom? Are you using Doxy? You know, I just did a 5-day training, and I got so much feedback. We used Zoom for the 5-day training, and I got so much feedback that said, you should have used this format, or you should have used that format. And I was like, I didn't even know those were formats. And so
Right.
I personally am not very savvy as when it comes to electronics, but I definitely, you know, want to encourage you guys to look at other platforms. And so I'll just take a second to see, you know, what forms of telehealth have folks been using.
And some of it may be what your agency has decided to use, because I know for us, our agency did like a business Zoom type deal, or Zoom healthcare. I'm not sure exactly what it's called. And so we have so many users that can be a part of that. So, you know, it could just be depending on what your agency has decided to use for telehealth. And I see some people are still doing face-to-face, which we are as well in certain circumstances.
Right. I would be curious, the folks that said they're doing face-to-face, and you can unmute yourself and talk. Have you been doing that format throughout the entire COVID, or did y'all just, you know, resurface back to face-to-face? And so that's my first question. And then the second one is, what are you doing to keep yourself safe and the family safe during this time?
This is Valerie. Okay, this is Valerie. We've been incorporating both telehealth and some face-to-face. I work with the ACT team, so we do have clients that we may have to deliver medications. So we have face masks and the face shield, and with majority of the clients, I'm outside so that we can have that social distancing in between us.
Is someone else going to talk?
This is Joy Grant with Cognitive Development Center. We're also doing telehealth and face-to-face. And so our face-to-face is based on the client's request most of the time. And so if they're requesting that we come out, then we go out with our masks on, and, you know, hand sanitizer. We take all of our stuff with us to their homes. And so it's for both safeties. So we have them wear their mask, and we wear our mask as well when we go into their homes. So we're doing both.
And Joel, just out of curiosity, like, have you had therapists who have not wanted to or been fearful, or?
I have not. All of my therapists are willing to go out. None of them are having any concerns about going out at all at this time. They are taking on very good safety precautions. You know, we talk about it every single week on calls about safety precautions. I've only had one client family to come up with COVID symptoms. And of course, my therapist did not go out for the 14 days plus, because we added it to his weekly summary, you know, safety concerns of the family and himself. And we waited till, you know, everything was clear. They was tested again, and then he started basically going out again for the family. But no problems at all. They did everything via Zoom during that time.
Right. And that's really part of the reason that we thought this forum would be a really nice opportunity for providers to talk about what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, how are they taking those safety precautions. So really appreciate the input. And so my goal after this is really gather some of the great ideas that y'all have and share it with the providers who maybe are not on the call, because I certainly believe that we can all learn from each other for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm with this is Alicia. I'm with preventive measures, and a lot of the therapists they're doing both. I have very few actually using Zoom, and they're saying that a lot of their families that was a little difficult to get them to, I guess, to try to walk them through all of this. So a lot of them are actually using like the Google Duo and like FaceTime, things like that. But and then a lot of them are just going to the homes because a lot of the area services are not like the internet services are not really good. So they're still going into the homes, things like that. Or they're having issues where people want to have sessions while they're here and there, and so many people are around, stuff like that. So they find it a little bit better still going to the homes face to face. So we do have and I have one of my therapists, she's a little elderly, so she's the only one that kind of don't want to go to the homes as much. So like I tell her, safety is always first. So she do what she feels is comfortable. And so when she goes out, she said she'll have them come out to her car, or she'll come out of the home so they have meet that way. So
I had a therapist the other day tell me that they both sat in their car in their driver's seat, and they kept the car running, and they just cracked the window and like drove up, next to each other, and they were talking out of the window. Like, so the window was the shield, but they were able to see each other. They were able to talk to each other. So I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. So I think the biggest take home here is that creativity, like you have to do whatever works for the family, because each family is very different and has different expectations of what's safe and not safe. So really nice feedback.
Christine, one other thing we're doing, we're doing, this is Joy again with Cognitive. We also do assessments via telehealth as well. And so what we do is when we do our assessments via telehealth, we have the parents to give us a verbal, because we have to send off for authorizations through insurance companies. So we have our families to give us a verbal over the phone saying that we are doing it via telehealth, and they give us permission to print their name on the form. The documentation is sent out to insurance companies. So we put on the form assessment via telehealth over whatever video or phone, and then we have them to give us the verbal and sign, print their name, and then we send it out that way. And then same thing we're doing if for our overarching goals, we use that as our treatment plans. So same thing with that, if they're not able to go out, we add a line, and we add via telehealth or whatever form that they did, audio, and then we ask the parents to give us that same authorization and print their name, and so we can put it in the file for to have part of the treatment plan. Something different we're doing to make sure that we have their signature stating that they were given us permission to do the services.
Right.
That's really good. I think one of the barriers that we've had in doing assessments is because we're trying to send everything through DocuSign and getting them to sign that way. But man, like sometimes getting those sent back is like a miracle. So I think that's a good thing to notate, because verbal consent, if you have that date, their name, especially to get the assessment in so that you can get that authorization, that's really good.
Good. So, so just to segue to the next question about primary referral sources, I remember when all of this happened and we had providers starting to panic, like, well, how are we going to get referrals? How are we going to sustain our programs? And in the middle of all that, it was in the middle of contract time for us, and every single team was able to get creative, still get referrals, and renew their contract. And so that's a huge kudos to every single MST provider out there that y'all were still doing, like Kirby said, whatever it takes to get those referrals in. And so I think that from what I heard around the state, that some of the primary referral sources may have shifted a little bit during this time. So what are y'all's primary referral sources? Where are you getting referrals from? How are you marketing to get those referrals? You know, I know that Kirby's supervisor was on the news just telling people like, this is a really difficult time, but our services are still open. You know, we still are taking active referrals. And so has your referral sources shifted? And how are y'all marketing those referrals?
Well, I'll go first. This is Jewel again. Mine have shifted tremendously, of course. We're just starting to pick up again because, of course, OJJ and juvenile services were all closed during the pandemic when it first started. Because we're in phase 2, it's still slow. You know, they're still doing a lot of court and everything via telehealth. You know, they're not having a lot of people come in. And so the referrals are still slow. But we are getting a little creative around my agency as well because we have multiple programs. And so we are starting to reassess some of the mental health clients that may be more of a fit for MST. You know, that maybe that someone referred them in and never really considered all the other referral behaviors that they had going on that were really behavioral. So we're looking at some of those cases and to make sure that we are putting them in the correct program. We are now contacting some of the, like the TAR Center, some of the mental health hospitals a little bit more because sometimes some of those clients are more behavior than they think it is. And so we're kind of contacting them a little bit more to get more referrals in. School hadn't been as easy yet because, you know, school is still trying to work out their problems. So I haven't been receiving a lot from them yet, but gradually we're growing a little bit. We're not at 1 and 2 anymore. We're like 4 per therapist. So we're growing.
Right. Right. And I'm glad you mentioned the schools, Joel, because I know that, you know, in the past, you know, we wanted to ensure that kids were involved in the system and they were at risk of out-of-home placement because of their behavior. And what we found during the pandemic is that there's a lot of kids who are at risk of out-of-home placement now that weren't at risk before. Because with everybody being in the home together and without them having the structure of school, their behaviors start to escalate. So we, as an agency, MST, has gotten quite a few referrals from school because teachers were getting called like, oh my gosh, when is school starting? You got to help this kid. And they were able to refer those kids to us. And so, you know, again, really getting creative on kids that probably weren't appropriate before are becoming appropriate because they're stuck in their houses. They're having aggressive behavior. They don't have the structure of the school. They're spending more time with parents. So, you know, I definitely like your thinking around thinking outside of the box. Any other ideas around referral sources or where you've shifted to get more referrals?
We have, one of the things that we're actually using our families a little bit more and just getting them to kind of spread the word to their relatives or neighbors or friends about, you know, what we're doing. And so they've actually been kind of helping us out with, you know, people they know and sending them over. And we've been using just the families to get those referrals.
Right. Yep. So our work ethic is generalizing to other families, right? Because you're doing a really good job with this kid and they're like, wait a minute, I have a friend or a cousin or a neighbor that needs services. And the really nice thing is they can reach out to you, and if they're not appropriate, you can help them find a different service. So at least they're making connections with some sort of mental health provider or behavioral health provider.
Yes.
So nice. Anybody else have anything before we move on?
I know something that we did at our agency, which for MST specifically, doctors' offices are not typically a huge referral source. However, with OJJ and schools and everything being closed like they were, we're like, okay, where are kids still going? And so doctors' offices was one of those places. And so we kind of did like a little referral push and sent out goodies and baskets and stuff like that to the different doctors' offices around that were already sending referrals in, but were potentially more for other programs. So just kind of trying to get creative and broaden our scope that way as well.
Yeah. I had one agency who made care baskets of like cleansing things, cleaners and hand wipes and all that. I'm like, wait, how do I get that?
Yeah.
It was just a really nice thought when you couldn't find any of that. They were able to get some and bring it to referral sources saying, hey guys, we're still open, please come find us. So
one other thing I do remember us doing, or I've done, we have two mental health agencies that I've contacted that actually sent me a couple of referrals because some of the kids were out of their scope, of care with mental health. It was more behavioral. And I was like, okay, I should call more mental health agencies more often because some of the kids are, their behaviors are more extreme than some of the mental health. It's not just ADHD or, it's more ODD or conduct disorder. And
right.
So they're noticing that they're more behavior. And so I was able to get a few from a couple of mental health agencies as well.
Right.
But a couple of them.
Yep. So yeah, I tell people that, we're not above begging and bribery. So whatever we can do to get appropriate referrals, we're completely fine with. All right, so let's look at, when we started getting the presentation together, initially I didn't include the overview. And then when Lindsay sent me the registration list, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't recognize a lot of these names. Let me just kind of give the MST 101 on what exactly we do. And so, MST is community-based. All of our services are typically provided in the home. So this pandemic really pushed us back a little bit because we're used to being in the home, in the community with these kiddos who are at risk of out-of-home placement. And we're specifically looking for externalizing behaviors. So kids who are running away from home, who maybe are using drugs, who are being aggressive towards other folks, who have curfew violations, who are basically not following the rules in their household. And so MST is really the tail end type treatment where if they don't get into this intensive evidence-based program, they're going to end up in some sort of system, whether it's juvenile justice or child protection or even, even jail or even out in the community living, homeless. And so we're really looking for those kids who are at risk of out-of-home placement because of their behavior. And the whole goal of MST is focusing on empowering those caregivers or parents who, caregivers could be defined very differently for every different kid that we work with, and specifically to solve current and future problems. So we're not saying that kids are never going to have problems again once they go through MST. We're not sprinkling any magic fairy dust on them and all of a sudden they're cured. As the mother of 3 teenagers, they're still going to have problems. But our goal is to empower the parents to handle those problems a little bit differently. And we do that by working with the entire ecology of the youth. And so we're helping the family. We're helping them identify pro-social peers. We're helping them make different choices at school to get involved, to help with academic achievement, and then really looking at the neighborhood that they live in. And so, that's what's really nice about MST is that we're working with their entire ecology, not just with the child themselves. Because what we know based on the research is that the way that the adolescent brain focuses, they focus on the pleasure principle. And so if we're only working with that child and they're encountered with a risky situation, they go back to what feels good with them. But if we're able to put some protective factors in place with the family by working through their entire ecology, their behavior is going to be able to sustain. So these kids will have difficult choices to make, but we're hoping because we're empowering the parents or their caregivers that they're going to be able to solve those problems a little bit differently and not rely on the system, not call probation or the police or have, have some sort of legal involvement. And so when you're thinking of a true MST kid, we're really looking at kids who are 12 to 17 years old, who have certain inclusionary criteria. But I want to start with the exclusionary criteria first. in MST, we don't work with kids who are living independently. We're working really hard with an adaptation to MST where they are working with kids who are independently. And we're working on looking at some of that funding for this state. But currently, we're only working with kids who are living in their homes with some sort of support system. So if they're living independently, that's an exclusionary criteria. If they're sex offending in absence of other antisocial behaviors. So basically what that means is if they're sex offending and they're not running away from home or using substances or being truant from school, those kids are better off served through an evidence-based sex offending program. But if they're sex offending and they have some of those other behaviors that we just talked about, those kids are appropriate for MST. We're not going to take a kid who is on that pervasive developmental disorder spectrum. So if they have moderate to severe autism, those kids are better off served through some sort of developmental disabilities. And then if they're actively suicidal, homicidal, or psychotic, we're going to want to get those kids stabilized in a safe treatment environment, and then they can get referred to MST. And then the last exclusionary criteria is if they are primarily referred for a psychiatric problem. And so like if they're primarily referred for like major depression or bipolar disorder, those kids really need to get served through a specialized mental health program because those are more internalizing behaviors. And in MST, we're really looking at those externalizing behaviors. So those kids can go to the local community mental health clinic. They can go through mental health rehab. You know, we want to specifically focus on those kids who are having some behavior problems. And so then I tell everybody the inclusionary criteria is everybody else, right? All those kids that I think folks mentioned have conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder. We want those kids whose behaviors are so severe that if they continue, it'll put them at risk of out-of-home placement. And so Kirby had mentioned, you know, at the beginning of the presentation that the whole philosophy of MST is whatever it takes. You know, we're going to do whatever it takes to engage a family in order to get behavioral change. And so that didn't change much when COVID started. We tried to figure out whatever it takes to continue to treat these families and engage them. And the funny thing is that within 24 hours of COVID, most of the documentation I'm sharing with you, MST services made available to the MST providers. I mean, they were on it. They were ahead of the curve, making sure that they still had continuity of care for some of the families that we were serving. And so the way that we do that is really through a very supportive, strength-based approach. You know, helping the family identify resources in their community. You know, and hopefully in MST, we were very proactive about that. We knew resources in the community before COVID broke out. So we were just helping families reconnect to that if possible. And so MST Services sent out these guidelines for teams to support through telecommunication services. They were really working at the state level to ensure that MST was going to get approved for telehealth. So, you know, we wanted to set the providers up for success. And so, you know, making sure that there was updated information for everybody, that team members had access to the updated contact information, making sure that you were communicating with the MCOs, the funders, to approve telehealth services, see if there were any exceptions. And Kirby will talk a little bit later about, you know, what's expected documentation-wise. But I think that all of y'all are aware of the importance of documentation. You know, I was on a call last night with one of my Virginia teams, and I was like, they're like, yeah, there's a safety plan in place. And I'm like, is it in writing? Oh, no, I think they just discussed it. Well, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So same with all this telehealth, if they're agreeing to do this assessment that Jewel mentioned, is it in writing? Do you have it on a recording? We want to make sure that we're, you know, we're documenting in order to ensure reimbursement, but we also want to be sensitive to confidentiality. You know, are we following the right rules? And Kirby will talk about how to kind of set that up to where folks aren't coming in and out of the room and, just adjusting people's confidentiality. And then also, there were so many families at first that were like, I don't have internet. I can't communicate with you. I can only do it by phone. And so really helping them identify free internet services in the community. I know in Jefferson Parish, they gave most of the kids computers to work on so they would have access to be able to do their homework. And then the most important thing is share ideas with each other. And that's the purpose of this call, was not only to share ideas across team members, but share ideas across the state. What's worked, what hasn't worked. And so, again, I think I mentioned that I will log anything in the chat rooms or that y'all said verbally, so then we can share, because I mean, we believe that we're all in this together. When I started opening MST teams around the community, I would say there's another MST team right in your backyard, but you're not in competition. This is a collaboration. We don't want kids on wait lists. We want to work together. If you don't have an opening, let's send it to another person. So, really making sure that we're working together and we're sharing ideas with each other. So the other thing that we've talked about is making sure supervisors are talking to other supervisors. We used to have a peer group for just supervisors that we stopped having because it felt like everybody's needs were getting met. Well, we're looking at, re-engaging in that process, having supervisors talking to other supervisors to share and support. Some of y'all are super lucky. You're working in agencies that are large enough to where there's multiple supervisors under one umbrella. Some of our providers aren't quite that lucky. So being able to support each other, using your expert as a support. The other thing that is super important during this time is self-care. I was on a call last week with a program director, and he kept saying, yeah, I think we all have COVID burnout. And I was like, is that like a new diagnosis? Like, tell me a little bit more about that. And he said, well, basically what that means is that we're tired of taking care of our kids all day and doing their schoolwork and then expecting to see our families. And like, we all just need a break from all of this. And so, I was like, well, what is your team doing for self-care? And he's like, well, I don't know. I can barely take care of myself. And so really looking at that self-care, making sure this is a really stressful time. And so making sure that all of your team members are, doing what they can to take care of themselves. We have an on-call policy, and typically people choose to be on call for their own families. We're really recommending at this time to rotate on call. We want to make sure there's therapist coverage, but it may need to be modified right now if needed. So really getting creative on how we can ensure that we're not only supporting our families, but we're supporting ourselves too. And then the other thing that we've learned pretty quickly is that we were relying on services for translation that were no longer available. So we have quite a few Spanish-speaking families, and we didn't have a translation service. And so making sure that we're identifying proactively those translation services if needed or even necessary. So we talked a little bit about making sure that resources are available in the community. When I do the 5-day training, I always tell folks that they need to have 2 binders available in their organization. One binder is an intervention binder. So what are some interventions that you can do with families that y'all can share with each other? Like, what are some cognitive behavioral interventions? Do we have a sample behavior plan in place? And then the other binder is a resource binder. So what resources are available in your community to help families if their basic needs are not getting met? So for like food or transportation or, electricity, making sure that our family's basic needs are getting met. And then making sure that we're all checking in with each other, pulling in the expert if needed. Typically in MST, we do supervision once a week and consultation once a week. I've had providers request to have it more often, like, no, we need to check in more often. I don't even think I'm okay, much less my family's being okay. And so making sure that, we might have shorter group supervision, but it also may include daily stuff. And then also, I've had providers that say therapists are so depressed that they have to call them every morning to make sure they're okay to see their families. And so again, just making sure that the team has the support too, in addition to the family. And then the other thing, I was joking with them, with Kirby and Lindsay before y'all joined. When I did this 5-day training last week, I had never done Zoom before. And so I had to go through what we call all of these dry runs to make sure that I knew what I was going to press and say, and I wasn't going to kick people off of Zoom. It's the same thing with this new situation with COVID, making sure that therapists feel confident to review the forms, making sure that they have practiced or role played, because this is all uncertain times and we just want to make sure that everybody's feeling comfortable. So Kirby's going to spend a bit of time and give examples of some of her therapists and what they've done. She's going to talk a little bit about creating your own workspace. If you have a child's home and you have to get on a call, what are you going to do? Consider trading off responsibilities. So Kirby's going to talk a little bit about how to set up a good session, what that's going to look like. But I think the most important take home, and this isn't for just MST folks, this is for administrators, this is for everybody, is you have to be able to be flexible and create your own schedule. Making sure that you're doing whatever the family needs in order to be successful. And so, encouraging everybody really to look at that flexibility. When we hire MST therapists, we tell them it's a flexible schedule. And we're like, it's not a flexible schedule around you, it's a flexible schedule around your family. Well, we've learned through this process that it's a flexible schedule for everybody right now, just ensuring that everybody's needs are getting met. So I'm just going to pause right here and see if anybody has any questions or any input or what you guys have done in order to take care of yourself and take care of your family. And this is for everybody. It just doesn't have to be our MST folks. Any thoughts? And we're also chatty in the beginning. All right, well, we'll keep going. And if y'all think of anything, just send a message and I'll definitely try to see it and catch up.
I think I heard somebody starting to say something.
Okay.
Christina, this is Angela. I just want to say that, and it looks like some of this is captured on the slide. One of the things that some of the people that I'm aware of have been doing is for some of the paraprofessionals in the schools, for whatever reason, some of them have been laid off. And so some people have gotten together and hired them. And they are actually where a group of families have gotten together who have to work from home. So the paraprofessional is actually going from house to house, caring for the kids and providing instruction. I mean, I know that's not that typical for our families who are receiving MST, but one of the things that I've done is, really look at what do parents need at this time? During this time, we've done a lot for students, but what do parents need who are not accustomed to, really teaching kids, bottom line, that's no other way to say it. How can we provide the necessary support so one, parents can stay sane, two, they understand how to manage their stress. 3, they understand how to manage their kids' stress. And so what are some of the things that we can do to help them in this time? I would just, throw that up as a need to be more aware, hoping that we can kind of zero in on.
Right. No, I agree 100%. So that's a nice creative idea of how maybe they could have like a mini school session to give parents a break. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I thank God every day that my kids were seniors in high school and freshmen in college, because I can promise you I would not have had the A, patience, or B, the skills to get them through, second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh grade math or English. So yeah, that's a huge stressor on our families. And then when we're like, no, you have to meet with us 3 times a week or whatever, that's pretty overwhelming and frustrating to them. So yes, any creative ideas like that we can use to help families get through each day, and that's basically what we're trying to get them to see is let's get through today. Let's figure out tomorrow. So very nice idea.
And then you were saying, I'm sorry. Is somebody else talking?
No, it's you.
Oh, okay. And then like you were saying, I just kind of noticed I do try to check in with the therapist daily. I kind of I started a little group text where I try to text them, let them know, just the constant reminders that I'm available. If they need to talk, if they need to vent, because we had a couple of therapists actually who had families that they had really grown to be close with, and then maybe they end up getting COVID or they were on the ventilator, and things like that, and it kind of really affected the therapist, with all of this, and just trying to see how they can be a support, now with maybe the parent or whatever the case is being sick, and trying to see, just things like that. So it is a lot on everybody. So like I said, I just kind of try to just a constant reminder to let them know that I am here. They just need to vent about, what's going on in their families and things like that, because we have had, several families that tested positive for COVID, and it was a really effect on the therapist. So
right. And we've actually had on some teams, and that provider might be on the call, that people on the team have tested positive and their family members have tested positive, and and then with funding and payment, and are they going to get paid, and so there's a lot of stressors. And I think the biggest thing that you said, Alicia, is support, like giving everybody support. At the end of the day, it's all going to be okay, but we need to constantly tell them that and support them. And so yep. All right, anybody else? Nice input. All right, so, really looking at each family. So we don't want to generally say everybody's going to do Zoom, or everybody's going to do FaceTime, or everybody's going to do phone calls. We want to look individually with each family and see what's most comfortable for them to be able to continue to meet with us. Or maybe that is in person, we just have to look at it. And then we're going to assess with each family whether they have access to necessary technology. Do they have cell phones, a tablet, a laptop? There was one provider who actually had to buy some of those phones. I don't even know what they're called, but like you can get them at Best Buy and put so many minutes on it for families to still get in touch with their therapist. Because one thing we want to make sure happens is that continuity of care. And so really looking at using some flex funds of your agency in order to get the technology they need in order to get in touch with us. And so, I don't know about you guys, but I needed lots of coaching on how to use that telecommunication technology. I was not an expert. My husband does IT, and so anytime I have problems, I just go to him. So I just haven't trained myself on all of this telecommunication technology. So when Kirby and I were doing this presentation, she's like, who you want me to be in charge of the slides or do you? I'm like, you got this, girl. I'll just be your support. So for those of you who know me, I'm a really good talker, but the technology is not my strength. And then the other thing that's really important that we've spent a lot of time on, and Kirby will talk about, is maintaining client confidentiality. I was sitting in on a session with somebody, and the client literally was taking us through their entire house. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to see the bathroom, you know, so just making sure that we're ensuring client confidentiality, and not just at their house, but at our house too. You know, I know for a while, my husband was working from home, my kids were in school at home, and, you know, trying to find a private place where we can have confidentiality. Being on a Zoom call or a FaceTime call or even a telephone call for an hour is a really long time. So, you know, we might want to consider more frequent, shorter contacts with families. They don't need to be on the phone with us that long, or, you know, it's exhausting. I mean, I did a 5-day training last week, and we even shifted it from 7 hours to 6 hours. And by the end of the day, I was exhausted just because of that constant trying to figure things out. And then we're going to just work with the caregivers in advance, like what's going to work for you. You know, is there anything that's going to trigger one of the kids to where it becomes violent? So helping them see. And then in MST, we always talk about being proactive, not reactive. And so planning for every single session. You know, we don't want to wing it when we get there or get on a call. We might want to email assignments in advance or have them gather information for us in advance. So then when we're actually meeting, it's productive and we're getting everybody's needs met. And so for those folks who are not on, not doing MST, you know, the MASS is a support system document that we use in order to help identify support systems. So getting that information out to them in advance. So we talked a little bit about making sure that we're aware of any safety concerns in the household. You know, in MST specifically, we're looking at shift in the hierarchy in the family. So most of these kids have the control in the family. And so the goal of MST is to shift that control back to the parents. At times it does create a safety risk because the kids get pretty angry with us that we're shifting that hierarchy. So when we're in the home, we can meet with the family maybe when the kid's at school. So we're having these conversations with the parent when they're alone. Well, now that everybody's in the home, that's a little bit more difficult. And so really helping the family identify, you know, signals for us if we're saying stuff that's starting to escalate somebody in the house. You know, it could just be like raising their hands like that's enough, or, you know, everything's okay when really everything's not okay. So really helping the family identify some visual signs if there are any safety concerns. Also looking at times when we can communicate with the family when the child is not present. Again, because we're trying to shift that hierarchy. So, you know, making sure that families feel safe, even though sessions look a little bit differently. And then we work with them on, you know, how to create a session space, getting everybody in the same room, around the same table. And we really try to make it fun and engaging. Like, it's not like, oh, here's Christine calling us again, but more of an excitement like, okay, let's put Christine on, you know, the iPad and get everybody in the same, you know, picture, and just reminding them that there's certain expectations and that we definitely don't want things to escalate, that our goal here is to continue with services and make sure that everybody's engaged in the process. And so we're going to communicate those goals for each session. And so, you know, we train therapists.
I think we had a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. I was just on the other slide you just had up. Christine, it's just funny that you say that you're talking about this, and I wish I had have thought of this about the visual signals and things like that, and maybe kind of just discussing this in the beginning, because we actually just had this last week, I think, or the week before, where we actually lost one of our kids, or one of our families because of that. And mom was needing the child to kind of, like you say, assist with the Zoom and things, because she didn't know how to do that. So of course the child was present a lot of times during those sessions, and I think the therapist was talking about some things while the child was present. Mm-hmm. And I guess the child did get upset and things like that. And so I guess now thinking about just hearing you say that, so maybe if the therapist had to talk to the parents about this, maybe giving a signal or something when we need to cut the conversation off, because we actually lost a family. She no longer wanted the services, and when the therapist was trying to talk to her about it, she was just like, well, he no longer wants the services, or he don't want to do it anymore. And, she was trying to just explain that this is, not about, what this is about him, but these sessions are really with you, just things like that. But she even said, don't text me or call anymore, just things like that. And we know what happened. But like I said, I guess, like you said, I didn't think either about the, the signals, and maybe to cut those conversations off, stuff like that. So that was just really something to think about when you talked about that.
Yeah, and so it's definitely tough times now, right? Because when you're in the home, you have so many different clues that you can pick up on, all those nonverbals, whereas when you're on either a phone call or even Zoom, like, I don't see y'all's bodies, I see your heads. So I don't know who might be with you or who might be shooting the bird at me, like, you don't know what's going on. And so as therapists, you have lots of limitations in success because you don't have the full picture. And that's what I've really loved about MST, is because you get such a rich picture by being in the home. But, we have some limitations. And so really making sure that we're paying attention to what's not being said in addition to what's being said. That's a really nice point. Anything else, guys? And thanks, Kirby, for flagging that somebody was trying to talk.
This is Valerie. Whenever I do my sessions, whether it's through Zoom, Google Duo, or even with the phone, I tell the client that, to make sure that they're in the room by themselves, and when someone else comes in, to notify me, so that I can protect their privacy, and just in case they don't want something that I'm saying to be heard by anybody else. So, I make sure that at the time of the session, they're by themselves alone. And if someone enters the room that I can't see, they need to let me know that someone came in.
Right.
And to piggyback off of Valerie, that's how we do it at Cognitive as well. We kind of, before we start any sessions, we ask them to verify that they're in a room just by themselves. And again, acknowledge if someone comes in, so we can kind of stop what we're talking about and then go back to it whenever the person leaves the room. And then if we actually have to have a kid come in, we talk about whatever we have to talk about first, and then we pull the child in, and then have the child leave if we have them in a session.
And do y'all think that's easier or harder if you get a new family? So I think, with families we already have engagement with, and that, to me, that would seem a little bit easier. But newer families, could they be like, who's this lady telling me what to do and who I can talk to? And so do y'all have any thoughts around that?
This is Valerie. I think in the initial, with building rapport, the whole family. And then once you're trying to build rapport with the child, then with the parents, then, do those individually, so that, you can build rapport. And just when explaining, the services and what you're going to be doing, right. You'll let them know, well, I'll work with you guys, and then I'll work with the child,
right.
And just, initially building rapport, start off with everybody together, and then individually throughout.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's what's so important, is making sure you're labeling everything from the very beginning, right? Letting them know that it's completely normal if I just have a meeting with you, Mom, or it's completely normal if I ask the child to leave the room. Or so just really letting them know the clear expectations from the very beginning, you don't want to do it once you're halfway in, because then they're going to feel like it's a punishment. Like, wait, what do you mean you're kicking this person out? But if you set it up from the beginning, I think that would be much more successful. And so that's just a nice segue about communicating your goals for each session, right? Letting them know that, you know, we're going to set up realistic goals. Our sessions may be a little bit shorter. We want everybody's input from the beginning. You know, we may shift some things along the way, but I think the most important thing for everybody is to make sure they label any of the concerns, and you label exactly what you're doing.
Can I add one thing here? This is Joe Carr. I'm not sure if you all are using any breathing techniques to help people calm down and kind of building that in as a definite possibility. I've done quite a bit of work with PTSD kinds of histories in folks. And I'm sitting here recalling one client who used to get very upset at work. And we developed a need for him to head to the men's room and close the door in the stall and breathe. And I mean, I haven't talked to too many people about that, but I think in these kinds of situations, using this as a means of helping to restore the family kind of level of distress is a goal that you want to encourage in all of the folks that are involved, every one of them, not just one or the other.
Right. Yeah, I agree, Joe. I think we all could use a little nice breathing techniques to relax during this time. And when we talk about the next slide, really when we're looking at like aggression and, you know, aggression has increased a lot during this time. So what can we do to help people take that moment, take the deep breath, you know, relax? Because I think there's so many stressors today that we haven't really looked at. And so just to finish this last slide about, you know, making sure that we're sending goals in advance, maybe for them to take a peek at it to review. And sometimes they may say, oh, let's not talk about this goal because it might escalate, or, you know, so really the most important thing is being on the same page and making sure we're setting the families up for success. So, yeah, thanks, Kirby. And then these are just some basic need stuff, you know, making sure they have access to thermometers and food, and if they need testing or if they need government assistance, just making sure the families have what they need. We talked about the MAS, which is a nice support system. Somebody talking? Yeah.
You're the first person that has mentioned to me the idea of making sure that thermometers are available in the home. I mean, it seems kind of stupid on the one hand. On the other hand, it's so easy to miss that, both in terms of family possession and in terms of what resources might be available, like Medicaid, for example. You know, I don't know if they're doing any of this kind of thing, but, you know, getting past those mountains of absent resources and needed resources, particularly with the COVID, is really quite basic. Period.
Right. And I mean, and we believe in MST that if folks' basic needs aren't getting met, whether it's health or food on the table, that they're not going to be engaged in the process of change. And so they're going to be more focused on those basic needs and not really focused on how can I keep my child from smoking weed every single day. And so, you know, we do spend a lot of time making sure that their basic needs are met, whether it's health or food or clothing. So yeah, Joe, thanks for supporting that. So Kirby, if you could go to the safety, because I feel like some of that we talked about already in the past slide. But we've found through this process that there's a higher risk of aggression and self-harm with some of our clients. And so we want to make sure that every single client has an existing safety plan And I don't believe this is just with MST. I think anybody should ensure if they're seeing a client, they need to have a really solid safety plan. We want to look at if there's any risk in the household, because they're spending a lot of time together. Their routine has changed. It's heightened levels of stress. Caregivers are getting more depressed. And so just making sure that we're really asking that question. Prior, I think, if there was no history of aggression, we tended not to dig into it too deep. Now we're really encouraging every single family to have a safety plan. And not just a safety plan for the child, but a safety plan for the entire family. And I'll give you an example of that. We have a kid that we were working with in another state, and for some reason, they were doing a session, and the kid said during the session, oh gosh, if you had any idea what was going on during these times, you would just come straight to my house. And he said it laughing. And then the mom said then the therapist said to the mom, like, what does he mean? And she's like, oh gosh, it's so crazy. Like us trying to get schoolwork done and us trying to ensure that, we're getting chores done, and everybody just making sure that we're trying to be as normal as possible. But that didn't sit well with the therapist. And so the therapist actually reached out to the child and found out that the child was getting abused by the family. The mom completely minimized all of that, but they ended up having to make a child protection report. And so I want families to know during this time that it's stressful. Everybody's going to be a little bit more anxious. Everybody's going to be a little bit more irritable. And we just need to help the family as part of their problem solving, decrease that level of stress. And, looking at the next slide, helping them brainstorm activities they can do at home, helping them to divide responsibilities in the home. Even for my own self, each one of my kids had chores based on the fact that they were in school all day. Well, now that everybody was home, everybody has an increased level of chores. So just really looking at what makes most sense. When are they going to have school assignments done? How will that be managed? If they need supports, can they pull in a paraprofessional like Angela had mentioned? So really helping families look at their day, helping them structure their day. Respite may be needed. Do they need to have one child go stay with another caregiver? What can they do in order for families to feel safe during this time? Because unfortunately, it's a pretty stressful time. And then even on top of that, they had this hurricane. And so we have families that don't have electricity now and don't have food. And, I try to not watch the news because I don't want to hear about all the sad things going on. But for teams that are covering those areas, an increased level of stress, increased level for therapists because they don't have electricity or, running water. So what can they do to be supportive? So now more than ever, it's important to provide that support. And then the last two slides is really talking about, making sure there's structure in the home. Kids really strive when there's structure. And so helping the family set up some level of structure, asking the family, well, what do y'all do if there's a crisis? So really preparing the family for success. And then the last slide is just before Kirby talks, is just really around, referral management, getting some new cases. In the past, we typically would let the supervisor just accept what cases they thought were appropriate. We're asking to have input from the expert because in the past there was this party line that we don't take self-referrals. We're getting more self-referrals during this time. And so, we want to make sure that the supervisors, the therapists of MST are really getting that level of support. So I think the biggest take homes for everybody is safety, making sure that our families are safe and making sure that they have all their basic needs met before we can actually start looking at being successful with any sort of interventions. So I'm going to stop here and see if anybody has any questions, see if we want to take a quick 5-minute potty break, and then Kirby will take over about kind of real life, what does it look like in the home, or on the phone or on a Zoom call, more of the day-to-day. So I'll stop here and see if there's any questions. So Kirby, maybe just wait a couple of minutes. I saw some people leave their screen, and then you can start up with, looking at ethical treatment.
Okay.
For telehealth. So just maybe a couple of minutes.
I like that people are engaging and asking questions.
Yes, me too. And I love that we have almost 60 people in the call.
Oh, I can only see like 5 right now, but
now that I'm not presenting, I could go look at other resources, check people's pictures out.
yeah. I think we said this at the beginning too, but for anybody who has questions or comments or anything that is on something that we're potentially not addressing in the presentation, mine and Christine's contact info is going to be at the end, and we'll probably hang on for a while afterwards in case anybody wants to stay and ask questions there as well. But yeah, feel free to email or call if there's anything that we haven't addressed or any kind of questions that you have. We're definitely available for that.
All right, do you want to just go ahead and get started? I know it's 10 after, and then we'll have to
wrap it up.
Yeah, well, you have 50 minutes.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to be talking on basically ethical treatment via telehealth. I know when all of this first came out, in the state, we had the mandated stay-at-home order that was issued in the middle of March. And so, that was a really quick turnaround for all the therapists who were doing in-home. And luckily, we had already potentially started doing telehealth and looking into that and what that would look like. But, I felt like we were just kind of scrambling there for a while and figuring out what the Louisiana Department of Health was going to allow us to do, and the restrictions being lifted on telehealth, because you typically have to have a training in order to be able to provide telehealth services. So the rest of the presentation is basically a lot of that information and what to do, what not to do. Because I know for our agency, we bill Medicaid for the services that we provide. And so we'll get payment for that. But however, we can be audited months later, and if things weren't done correctly, we can have to pay it back. And so we want to avoid that at all costs. So there's several things in here that you want to make sure you're documenting appropriately in your notes that we'll talk about as well. So for the first one, setting up the room in the session, and please feel free to add things in the chat and kind of share what your setup has been. So especially for the time where it was mandated, you were doing sessions from home. And so in order to maintain confidentiality, obviously you want to have your own room that's set up where you can do those sessions. I know we had one therapist, they set up like a pole with a sheet behind it. So there was like a barrier between them and the rest of the room, because some people have offices at home, some people have their bedroom and that's their office at home, which is fine. Some other things is if the room is carpeted, the sound doesn't carry as much. You can have those noise machines outside of your door. Like Christine said, there's a lot of families that were working from home and everybody was working from home, including the kids. Something else to consider is making sure you don't have windows or anything like that behind you so that people can see your families that you're meeting with, and making sure that you're maintaining that confidentiality as best as possible. You can place a sign outside of your door letting them know that you're in session so that they know they can't come knock on the door at that time. And this last one kind of sounds funny, but making sure that you're dressing completely. If there is one thing that I have learned as a supervisor, it is to not just assume that people know what they should be doing. And so we were actually informed that there have actually been lawsuits due to clinician exposure. So make sure that you are letting your therapist know that you need to be dressing professionally in these sessions, just as if you were in person. Another piece that I think we noticed, especially bringing new families in the midst of telehealth where you've never met these families in person, building rapport and engagement is crucial. And, you know, it's not typically, you can sometimes get that within the first week or two with a family, and doing that over the phone is going to take a little bit more practice and skill. And so, you know, I think for MSTers, sometimes we're going in, we're meeting the family, you know, having conversations about what's been going on in the home, starting to get some of those OAGs in place. And, you know, in this situation, it's just going to have to be slower than that. And you need to focus on, you know, figuring out how to set them up with Zoom or whatever platform that you're using, if they have the capabilities to do that. I know a lot of our families, it's either grandma or grandpa, sometimes great grandma or grandpa that are the caregivers, and they don't want to do that, nor do they have the capability to do that. And sometimes it's using the youth's phone in order to do that. So really just being patient and taking your time, walking them through it step by step, and how to, you know, set those kinds of formats up, because, you know, they are more HIPAA compliant. However, like, they have limited the restrictions on telehealth. We can do FaceTime, we can do just audio only. I do have some therapists that, based on where the family lives or not having a phone or laptop with camera capabilities, it is just over audio. So it's not impossible, but definitely just taking your time to get that engagement with them. And even right now, we were hit pretty hard by the hurricane. So, you know, there's some families that are just getting assigned to a new therapist this week. And so engagement may be, okay, I'm going to help you pick the tree up out of your yard. I don't know, you know, for those that are able to do face-to-face. And so just getting creative with those kinds of things as well. Anybody have any examples that they would want to share how they've been able to build rapport and increase engagement with families during this time?
Well, one of the therapists shared with me, one of her families, I think, had COVID, or somebody in the family had COVID. So of course the therapist couldn't go to the home. So she had to do more of the telehealth, which the family didn't want to do a lot of that. So she was trying to, you know, kind of get her body in more so, but the family was saying, you know, she needed hand sanitizer, she needed this and that and all that. So the therapist actually, you know, told her that she would bring it and set it on the doorstep and things like that. So she actually took some things over to try to help build their rapport and stuff like that. So she did by taking them some, you know, cleaning stuff there.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I just wanted to ask a quick question following up on Alicia's comment. Earlier, Christine had said something about flex funds. And while I'm primarily private practice, you know, needs exist and decisions need to be made about investigating further and what to do. And so can somebody talk just very briefly about flex funds? No?
I think it's more like at the discretionary of the agency, really. Like if there's kind of like a pot, if you will, to help some families. I know we have at times given out things for minutes to put on phones. And honestly, a lot of my therapists do that on their own as well. They're all independent contractors and write that kind of stuff off for tax purposes. And so, but when this all first started, we have the Children's Advocacy Center that's a part of our agency as well. And so they had a bunch of goodie bags that were created for that kind of thing. So depending on the need, I know our agency has like an allotment for that kind of deal.
So it's kind of organization by organization rather than a program.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so Joe, I think that when I start every MST team, we ask them to put aside some flex funds in order to help with engagement or help with some strategy. So it's really more part of the MST expectation or required program practice. I don't know how that can generalize to private practice, but I do know there's some businesses out there that are always looking to make donations, you know, so maybe just getting creative with that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
This is Valerie. One of the things I did for some of my clients, because a lot of them have Medicaid, we got them government phones for the ones that didn't have it, because everybody that has Medicaid are able to receive government assistance phones and internet services. So we signed all our clients that didn't receive that up for that.
Okay.
Nice.
Good.
And back to the other topic about as far as building rapport and what I do to keep my clients engaged. After each session, I leave them with homework to do so that we have something for the next session to discuss and go over.
Yes, I love homework.
Yep, to piggyback off of Valerie, we believe in homework. Homework is like one of the best things. So you'll have something for the next session to start off with. So you start off with whatever the assignment you left with. It's them coming up with whatever the rewards and consequences is. They'll write that down. Next session you'll have that, or if it's support or whatever it may be. But rapport for us, we don't be a report at the beginning. And there is no rapport with our families because they're like, oh, that's not me the problem, it's the child the problem, And so the biggest thing for us is to as they say with MST, whatever it takes. And so if we have to take them a cup of coffee or a box of donuts for breakfast in the morning,
Absolutely.
Whatever it is to get in the door. And since it's COVID, it's a little bit more trickier, to take those cup of the donuts or the coffee. So the hand sanitizer does work because they're willing to let you in if you have sometimes our agency, we're providing masks for clients, so if they don't have them, we actually have a box at the office. We take them with us to the clients, and so sometimes that helps as well because they're happy that you're bringing them a mask to put on during this time.
That's great. I love that. I did add another slide. I was trying to put some MST in action for y'all. Obviously, I made up these names, but it's based on cases that we've had. And this was a successful one in which it took multiple sessions to help get this family set up with Zoom. And this therapist in particular is adamant about using Zoom because she wants to make sure she's following confidentiality and HIPAA to the T. But it was actually very beneficial, and the grandmother reported being so grateful for it because they had to attend court via Zoom. And so that's another way to kind of help get the buy-in from families as well, because I know for here in Ouachita Parish, all court is over Zoom right now. And so they have to be able to attend that. And so that was helpful in helping get that engagement as well. So confidentiality, obviously one of our number one things. I think we have to be even more aware of how we're keeping this via telehealth. Like we've already discussed that Christine said, we're on the phone. They pretty much are taking us wherever they're going. There's plenty of times my therapist is like, well, I called them and they were at the store, or I'm in the car with them. And so just as if, you were in the home asking them, well, who else is in the car? And can anybody else hear me? And so constantly asking those questions. I think Jewel was saying that they always verify the location at the beginning of the session. And that's actually one of the things LDH has said, you have to ask these questions and it needs to be notated in your note for each session. And so that's something that I've had my therapist do, is ask them where they are, ask them who is present. If you hear a voice that you don't know that comes up in the middle, ask them who that is, if it's okay if they're there. And so definitely setting those expectations in the beginning is very helpful. And reminding them, even though I'm not in the home, I'm still a mandated reporter. Christine gave that example as well. We're not going to try to research anything. We're not there to prove anything. If we suspect, we are still mandated reporters. And so that still happens over telehealth. You can have people pan the room with your device. We have our therapists do that as well. You can see I'm the only one here in this room conducting this session, and have the families do that as well. Also unplug all smart devices, Alexa or whatever they're called. I don't have those, but they're always listening. My cell phone is always listening to me when I don't know it is. And so making sure all of those things are unplugged and isn't picking up any client information that's being shared during the session.
And Kirby, somebody just put in chat that they actually even ask if they're in Louisiana, because if they're on vacation or you can't bill for those services. So I didn't know that. So that's a really nice addition.
Yeah, we just had a client where mom has been in Texas and she never shared that information with the therapist. And when she realized that, she's like, "What do you mean you're in Texas?" "Oh, well, I'm moving there, but I'm keeping all my services in Louisiana." Well, you can't do that. So yeah, that's definitely a good question to ask. So it's learning more each day for sure. But yeah, I didn't know that you couldn't bill if they're out of state at the time, like if they're on vacation or something.
So I actually took the telehealth, the other telehealth training, the one that you have to take to provide telehealth services. They cannot be out of Louisiana, but you can be out of Louisiana and still provide the services. So if you're traveling somewhere as the therapist because you're doing telehealth, you can still provide the services, but they cannot be out of the state.
Okay. Good to know.
So say if you went to Texas, I guess to visit a family member, but you're still doing the services with the family in their home. If they're still in their home in Louisiana, you can still provide the services.
Okay.
Yes.
And a lot of people who are licensed, if they have, because I know with being in Louisiana and Texas, you could take the jurisprudence test and be dually licensed. If you're dually licensed in another state that your client is in, you're able to do services if they go out and visit like another state.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. That's why we're doing this. Okay. So another one, the session checklist. We talked about this a little bit and we briefly touched on this as well. Basically, the questions that you're asking them at the beginning of every session. So where are you at this moment? Have them scan the room, making sure there's not anybody in there that shouldn't be in there. Another thing, and I'll talk about more about safety plans in a minute, you want to know what their location is in case there is something that happens. There's a physical aggression issue that escalates, and you can't get there, and you're needing to call the police. You need to have a location to be able to send them to should something like that occur. So there's just some basic questions here that you can ask. Another thing that you are required to do that LDH has discussed is reviewing the safety plan in each session. So basically what I have done with my therapist, LDH has said that if you're going to be able to bill for telehealth, you have to have a safety plan in place. So in that very first session, there has to be a safety plan. So we might not have all of the OAGs down yet or all the referral behaviors for an MST safety plan. For all the MSTers, our safety plans are extensive. And so basically for the very first session, we're really just focusing on any potential COVID risks, making sure that the home is safe, that they have the basic needs. We're documenting where the closest emergency room is. If we lose contact with them over the phone, what's a backup number that we can call to resume the session, you know, and identifying other supports as well. And so on here, even if there are no current like immediate threats at that time, you still have to have that basic COVID safety plan. And, you know, the reason for that is that, you know, we're, at the time when we were at the mandated stay-at-home order, that was like one of the main reasons why we're getting all that information and continuing to do so. Because I still have therapists. Some of my therapists, I had to like do everything I could to keep them at home because they were just going. And then others, you know, have babies at home and aren't comfortable going out just yet. And so it varies from each one. So each progress note must show documentation that you have reviewed the safety plan. And so we have added something in we have an electronic health record that we do all of our notes on. And so we added an automatic question in there. Did you review the safety plan for this session? And so then you can automatically document that, and it's in for each one. And we use DocuSign to get the signatures for these, but I love the idea. I think it was Jewel that talked about getting that verbal consent, because sometimes you'll send the email, it never comes back. However, you can to show that you have reviewed that safety plan with the family and documenting that in their file. And then also sending them an email, a copy of that safety plan as well. Any questions about safety plans? I did put like a little sample on the next page, not of the whole safety plan, obviously, but just like for those that were not, okay, this is not necessarily for suicidal ideation. That's not a safety plan for this, but due to the COVID crisis, this is the reason for this safety plan and why they're receiving services via telehealth. All right, screen sharing. This has been a really cool thing to be able to do through Zoom. I'm not sure how some of the other formats can do this, but you know, I think doing multiple sessions over Zoom is it's a skill set, and it's another draining piece. I feel like that is very different from doing face-to-face. We talked about that a little bit, the COVID burnout. Doing consistent sessions over Zoom is exhausting. And so being able to bring some creativity to that and using screen sharing. I know some therapists have figured out how they can have the families writing on the screen and it coming through. Do not ask me how that has worked. I do not know, but apparently that is out there. So something you can use that to change your sessions up a little bit, keep them engaged. You can collect sequences this way. You can build fits and have them more engaged in the session. Obviously make sure when you're sharing a screen that you don't have any other information pulled up so they can't see any other client's information or other documents that you have. Make sure all your other browser windows are closed so it's just picking up what it is that you're wanting to share with your family. Also ask permission from parents before sharing different resources. We have different families that have different values, different beliefs, so make sure before you're sharing certain things and resources that you've had that permission from them prior to.
Kirby, one of the experts told me that like there's also, and I don't know how to use it, so I won't know the answer if you ask, but they have a whiteboard through Zoom where like they're actually drawing fit circles in the whiteboard and all that.
That's what it's called, whiteboard. I forgot.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting concept too, that you can actually use some visuals when you're sharing the screen. Yes,
you can create those fits and write out the sequences. That way the family's looking at it to make sure you're not missing anything. It's a pretty cool technique. And that is on Zoom, the whiteboard part.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did an example of some things that they have done. They did use the whiteboard piece so that they could do a sequence of the most recent incident of living without permission. And, you know, especially during this time, we've had a lot of our kids that will just go whenever they want to go. Parents don't know where they've gone. And so with COVID and all of that that's happened, And even now with the hurricane and all the power lines being down, I'm telling you, I've never seen more trees down than I have from this storm. Leaving out permission, that's just a whole other level of risk added to that. So being able to go through those with parents is definitely helpful. And then based on that sequence, they're able to create a fit, and they're able to do that together rather than the therapist just talking at them, but they're able to collaborate and do that together. Okay, so some other helpful apps. I think Angela talked about what can we do for parents, because they're trying to figure out life just like we are during this time. Lots of different stressors, and like MST, we primarily typically meet with the parents. However, in order to get that engagement and buy-in, I think it's very helpful to be like, okay, I'm gonna meet with your kid for an hour. You can go, cook dinner or get something done that you need to do, and I'll occupy their attention at this time. And there's lots of different apps on here as well. Joe, you talked about doing some breathing techniques, and most of these are more of the calming, doing some breathing techniques. I think the virtual Hope Box has like different even games on it just to kind of help calm them down if there's like a lot of tension going on, and just kind of breeding a different type of environment. So there's breathing techniques on here. There's group activities that the family could do together. They're all apps that they're able to download, and they're all free. So I put a list of those on there if anybody was interested in those. Are there any other apps or anything like that that y'all have used with your families during this time?
Has any of the families actually got those apps for themselves and started using them?
Yeah, I think it's the Calm one.
I love it.
You use it?
Yes, I use Calm. It's really helpful. They have you to lay down and do like the 10 minutes and, the breathing exercises. I really love it. And it's different ones, so you can choose different programs or different areas. You can like relaxation areas. I like that about it too.
Yes. Is that the one that has the sleep stuff on there too? It'll read you like a sleep story or something?
Yes.
Yes. I thought that was pretty cool, because I know some of the kids are staying up all night playing games or doing whatever and not going to sleep, or they say they can't go to sleep. And so I thought that was a cool app on there. But I was listening to some of them.
I tried it with my daughter. She did not like it as much.
Really?
Maybe because we did it together. She was just like, ah. So she was like, I'm like, is your eyes closed? Are you relaxed? She's like, no.
She didn't want to go to sleep. Let's see. I think we had some other people. Oh, the coloring apps. I have seen those. Those are pretty cool. They'll have like the big designs on there, and you can color them different shapes, because I know a lot of people enjoy that as like a de-escalation technique. But I did see that there were some apps for those. Awesome. Okay, so another documentation piece, when this is kind of breaking up depending on what type of session that you're having. So I know for a lot of our families, depending on where they live, there are a lot of audio only sessions, whether they don't have access to internet, or we have people way out where internet's not even an option. That's kind of hard to believe in this day and age, but there are places where internet's just not there. And so if a session is audio only, LDH is requesting that you notate that and the rationale for why it is only audio. And then each progress note, we discussed this in regards to the safety plan, including a documentation of the backup plan. If the session is interrupted, if internet is dropped, how are we going to continue this session? So I know those have happened multiple times. And so making sure you have that backup number or way to contact them ready, and documenting that in the note as well. And then it also must be documented that the client and family were informed of who would be involved with the session and what their role would be. So I think that's just a basic guideline to begin each session with, and go ahead and document that in your note of what that's going to look like for each session. And I've also asked my therapist to include, like, if it is a video session, to document that as well, along with which format is being used, whether that's FaceTime, whether that's Zoom, Doxy, whatever format that is. So I know a lot of agencies are doing face-to-face. Like I said, some of my therapists, I had to like make them stay home, especially when it was, you know, in Ouachita Parish, we were one of the hot spots. And so we really had to kind of take some extra measures before we were able to do face-to-face again. Once we entered into phase 2, our agency released them to be able to do face-to-face under specific circumstances. Now, I don't believe this is necessarily LDH. This is kind of just what our agency has done. But, you know, during this time, having telehealth be the primary source of delivery, unless, you know, there's an urgent need or medically necessary. And so for a lot of our kids who are on the higher risk end, like, there are going to be situations in which, you know what, like, I need to go out. And there's things that we do prior to those therapists going out, but also if there's a lack of access to telehealth service, which you've already mentioned, not having phone, not having internet or access to those kinds of things, or if telehealth isn't working. I mean, there's going to be some of our families where, you know, y'all have mentioned as well, like, they don't want to do it. And so, you know, if it's not proving to be effective and we're not meeting our OAGs the way they need to be met, then looking at telehealth or face-to-face being the alternative there. So always, I would say, have the therapist review these cases with you to make sure that it's okay for you to be going out, and obviously that your supervisor is aware that that's happening. One of the things that we do before we allow therapists to go out to meet with the family is you need to have a waiver and a health screening completed. So I know y'all mentioned like having the masks on, bringing masks for your families. I think that's awesome. But also doing that health screening before you go out. So do you have fever? And this goes back to making sure they have thermometers in the home so that they're able to see if they have fever or not. Does anybody in the home have any of the symptoms, which I know basically COVID can be any symptom at this point. So seeing if those are present in the home, if they've been exposed to someone else who potentially has had COVID, and how long ago that was. So, and it's always the therapist has to feel safe and the family has to feel safe for you to be there. Because the last thing you want is like, well, our family didn't have COVID until the therapist came out and now we have COVID. So, which is why we do the health screening and also have the family signing a waiver, allowing the therapist to come out. I think that's the biggest one. And so I actually added those on the next slide. This is just a copy of what we use for our agency that we created for our therapists, getting consent to do face-to-face with the family. And so most of our families are like, yes, please come out. Like, I do not want to do this over Zoom. And so as long as the therapist is safe with that and the families are safe with that, we go through the waiver with them, have them sign it. We document that in their file, as well as completing a health screening, which this is just a basic one that we've done. I think you should be able to like copy these off of here if you would like to, but making sure that health screening is done and having that documented in the file as well to make sure that no symptoms. And you're doing this health screening on yourself as well, not just on the family. Any questions about the waiver, health screenings, or anything else? Has anybody used anything like that for when they're doing face-to-face sessions?
This is Valerie. I've done the health thing prior, especially if I'm going to see someone face to face,
Right.
just to go over that quick thing to make sure that, they haven't been exposed. And that is also one of the questions that's on our health survey, if had they been exposed to anyone that had symptoms of COVID.
Right.
We have not done the waiver. We asked some of the questions on the health screen, but we don't have an official health screen, and I do like that. So I just took pictures of both of them because I would like to incorporate both of those in at our agency. I like it. Or if you could send a copy of it via email,
Yeah, that'd be great.
Make it work.
I think did we send a copy of the PowerPoint?
I think it will get sent out after.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't know if you have like a Word version of this, Kirby, that
Yeah, I can get one.
maybe you could just send it to Lindsay and then Lindsay can get it out to folks on the call.
Definitely. That'd be great.
And then the other thing, I don't know if folks, everybody gets to see the chat, but it looks like Dr. Rubio shared an evidence-based app that you can look for. So if folks can check their chat boxes, that might be something that people want to look into.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm having some people request a copy of the safety plan as well. So I can
and the PowerPoint will be emailed to you guys. So all that will be sent to y'all after. Right, Lindsay?
Yes, I'll send all that out after, Christine.
Okay, perfect. And then the other thing too is just here is Kirby and I's contact information. And just to clarify like who you should talk to if you want to know about stuff like on the ground, get in touch with Kirby. If you want to know about how to possibly be an MST provider or how, we've worked collaboratively with other providers, get in touch with me.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll probably stay on the line for a while if anybody had further questions or anything, or if you have some questions right now that we can ask with the group, but that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank y'all.
Thank
Y'all
you.
are very interactive. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Very informative. Thank you.
Awesome. Y'all are so kind.
Right. Well, if anybody has any questions, like Kirby and Christine said, please put them in the chat box or unmute yourselves and feel free to use these last few minutes for an open discussion. And like we mentioned, the materials requested, including the PowerPoint slides, will be sent out in a follow-up email with your CEU certificates. So thanks again, everybody, for participating today.
A good one.
Hi, this is Valerie. My and it's like very choppy and keeps knocking me out of the session. But I did wanted to get information like on MST training, if it could be sent to my email.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind emailing me, and then I'll reply back, just making sure I have everything accurate. So just email me at thecbenora@jphsa.org, and then I'll get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Kirby. This is a question for you. What is some of the things we need to include in the safety plan for telehealth?
So, and I'm going to send a copy of that one as well. So I think the biggest things are their current address. And, I always call a safety plan a living document because it can change, which is why the telehealth requirement is that you're reviewing it with the family for each session. And so main things are the nature of why the safety plan is being created. So that basic one for and why they're doing telehealth. So it would be due to either the stay-at-home order or the safer-at-home order is what they've called it now. What their current address is, their phone numbers, any other safety concerns that are going on in the home. And if there aren't any at that time that are, a severe risk or anything, then you can just leave it with the fact that there's the COVID crisis going on. So yes, contact information, address, backup numbers. We include the closest emergency room or closest hospital to where they're living, because some of our families are very remote. And then we also leave the therapist phone number on there, and you could potentially put the therapist supervisor number on there as well, because obviously those numbers are a part of the safety plan. Those are the basic things that we would need to make sure we're on there.
Prior to beginning teletherapy, I already had an informed consent for telecounseling services that entail all of this. So
Awesome.
do I need to review all of this? I mean, at every session? That would take almost 10 to 12 minutes of my time, right?
Right. And so if the family has a copy of it, you can basically just ask, do there need to be any changes made to the safety plan? Is everything still what we've originally discussed?
Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't know the family had to be given a copy.
We do, especially during this time. And honestly, I'm not sure if that's a mandate from LDH, but for them to have a copy, obviously they know the steps that they would need to follow should something come up, and have those numbers to contact as well.
Okay, thank you.
Because the goal of MST is to empower them to handle those current and future problems. And so we want them to be part of the safety plan. So hopefully at some point in time, if there's a safety issue, they're implementing it on their own without our help for generalization purposes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments or?
Somebody asked if there would be an evaluation at the end. I don't believe we had one.
Yeah, I think Lindsay replied that there isn't.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see that now.
But if anybody has any feedback of what you think would be helpful or presentations in the future, certainly send it our way and we'll try to